Hi guys, Knife Edge UK here. Got another video for you today. This is one of the first ones I'm filming back, so forgive me if I'm a little rusty, but I'll do my best for you. Today's a little bit of an overview / review. It's an older knife that's quite hard to get hold of at the moment, but there's a good chance there'll be more of them, albeit in a slightly different guise soon. This is the Hinderer MP1, or Modular Platform 1. And this is going to be quite freeform, as is general on this channel. I wanted to talk about this knife because it's always been quite a surprising one for me, or at least for the last couple of years since I first handled one. I thought I'd bring it to you and share some of my thoughts. So before we get into the knife itself, let's quickly do a couple of size comparisons, just in case you're watching this and there's some available or there's some coming up. So there it is on its own. There it is against a Spyderco Capara. Angle's slightly squiffy. These are very similar in blade length, and the handle on the Capara is just a smidge longer. We've got, what have we got? Sorry if I'm shaking the camera, by the way. There we have a large Sebenza. Sebenza's got a hair more blade length and maybe a tiny bit more handle, and then perhaps a quite a pertinent example to put alongside it would be a, whoops, let's get that into camera, shall we? A 3.5 inch XM18, and we'll do one more Hinderer comparison. This is a Jurassic. So you can see the Jurassic is actually quite a comparable knife in many ways, and we'll come back to that later possibly. Okay, so the MP1. So this came out a few years ago to a fair bit of fanfare. At the time, I believe the half track was released at a similar point and maybe slightly overshadowed this knife. This particular version they were all in S35VN as far as I'm aware. There were originally some working finish ones, and this one's quite a curious one that I wish I knew a little bit more about the numbers of these, but this is a full titanium one with a carbon fibre inlay and a satin finished front scale with stonewash around the sides. I've had a couple of others in hand, which they've all been full tie, the ones that I've handled. One from a good friend and sharpening customer, Craig, I know you're out there, that's Steel City EDC. He also runs the I'm a moderator as well, but there's also a European Facebook group which I'll pop a link to in the description below. He's had two as well. One was plain titanium. That was the first one I handled, and I'd never been particularly interested in the MP1 before, but once I had that in hand, I completely fell in love with this knife. And I've also handled his more recent one, which is a blue titanium one, again a full tie. That's fantastic as well. It's got a slightly softer detent than this one and the first one. But these are from a time before Hinderer's tri-way system, which you'll see indicated on the current knives by that little symbol there. Basically, these run on the old school Teflon washers. Now, I know that there's some great YouTubers and people that I like an awful lot in the community that go on about how much they dislike Teflon. I really don't know why, because Teflon's an absolutely brilliant material for a washer. It's got a really low coefficient of drag, as you'll hear people say, and it gives just an extremely buttery feel. But it does, of course, mean that the detent on the knife has to be well tuned, because obviously you've got more resistance in the pivot than you would have if you were dealing with bearings. Hinderer had problems with that throughout all the early generations, really up until late Gen 4 of the XM18, and then obviously since the tri-ways come in, that's been completely solved. What the tri-way basically the period that involved the tri also introduced this lock bar insert. That to me is the biggest downside of the current Hinderers. I loved just the straightforward carbidized lock face. I just think it worked exceptionally well. It meant you could have a relatively soft lock bar tension with great lockup. On the most recent ones with the steel interface, because you have more slip from a steel interface, generally speaking, you have to have a bit more lock bar tension to make them secure. It just means that there's a bit more of a compromise going on in the action, and you'll find when you switch out a modern recent tri-way Hinderer to Teflon washers, it just doesn't feel, by and large, there are exceptions and some knives are slightly different, but by and large they don't feel as sweet as a really well dialed in pre-tri-way Hinderer on Teflon does. This one has a perfect action. It is fantastic. I mean, the detent is just brilliant. There's no blade play on this at all as I speak to you. It's perfection, just It's just such a gorgeous action. It's the best action of the three that I've had in hand for my tastes. The detent's a little bit harder on this one, but it's still ultra buttery smooth in the close. It's just fantastic. So what the MP1 brought to the table when it was first released was a slightly more thinly ground blade. Nowadays, a lot of Hinderers have a grind that's similar to this. It's very usable. It's still robust. Sure, it's not going to win any slicing competitions, but it's very usable for the average things that you're going to use a knife like this for. It bought the modular backspacer. Again, modular platform 1. There have been a few of these released for other models. The Jurassic, which I'm picking up the wrong knife. The Jurassic also has a modular backspacer. You can buy them for the XM18. It's a little bit of a failed promise, this. It was supposed to have, you know, plain ones without the lanyard hole. You were supposed to have ones with, you know, glass breakers or bottle openers or whatever. We've seen very few. I'm hopeful that with this model probably coming to Triway at some point, you know, it'll be the Gen 2 of this model, that we will see more of these become available. But as it stands right now, it's just a lovely, well-milled backspacer. So kind of ignore the modularity. You know, this is one of the, in fact, actually, I think this is the only Hinderer that has, whoops, the internal stops run inside. Most Hinderers use the thumb studs as the primary position for your stop pins, effectively, whereas this guy has the thumb studs located a bit more nicely for actually opening with them, but then you still have a stud bracing on the frame. This creates quite a lot more milling that's required. Sorry, I will get in camera, I promise. Creates quite a lot more milling inside the pivot, quite a lot more work, and that's one of the things about these. These were expensive when they were released, and that was one of the things that really kind of sank the ship of this knife, apart from the fact that obviously the modular backspacer thing didn't really happen. The other main thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that these were quite expensive. If you consider you know, speaking in US pricing here, just for the sake of argument, because it's harder to detail once you deal with exchange rates and shipping and all that kind of thing. If you think of the average current Hinderer as being $425 in its base form with G10, then you're looking at a huge jump to these. With G10, I believe these were about $100 more. I could be wrong about that. Correct me in the comments below. There were a few of these just released from this old batch by Hinderer directly, and that was roughly, I think they were $550. I could be wrong. I should stop talking about things that I don't know. Anyway, they were more than a G10 version of an XM18 or a Jurassic would be. There are reasons for that people don't seem to talk about, but I'm going to today. The other thing was, of course, that once you added a tie scale to that, these got quite expensive. They were generally over $700, and that is quite a lot of money for a production knife. And particularly when these came out, we didn't really have the Koenigs of this world. Shiro weren't as easy to get hold of, so this seemed like a considerable amount of money. It is a considerable amount of money, but I'm going to tell you why I think that if you countenance that a normal Hinderer at 425 plus a tie scale at between, you know, about 200, you know, we're up there over 6. If you countenance that while it's, in my opinion, still a bit too much money, even though I have quite a few full tie Hinderers, so I've obviously drank the Kool-Aid there somewhere along the road. If you agree that that's a bit too much money, but you understand that that's what people pay for them, then this knife at a little bit more than that stock, I really don't see a big problem with. Sure, I still think it's a bit overpriced for what it is, but when you consider it against Hinderer itself, it's okay. The main reasons for that are the aforementioned change to the pivot system. Everything's so well done in there, it's immaculate. The fact that, as I say, these early ones came with tie scales. You have milling on the back here that's quite interesting. You also have that on the front of the full titanium ones, or you have this inlay. Again, I don't think there were many of these made. I think this is a relatively rare layout for these, but equally, the inlay's done beautifully. It's excellent, and the ones with the tie scale milling on the front look really good as well. And then the other big thing that you have is you have this detailed chamfer work around the edges. You have a flat, and then a step, and then another step, and it goes beautifully around the edges of all the screws. It's just an extra level of detail and fit and finish compared to most of what Hinderer offers. And Hinderer make great knives in the modern world. They're probably my favourite production company at this point, outside of kind of the ultra high-end CNC guys like Koenig and Shirogorov. But they are exceptional. They're doing wonderful work, and stuff like this, you know, recent Gen 6 Bowie is a fantastic knife that's virtually flawless. But this knife, it's also virtually flawless, but it has a few more details, a few more high-end little bits and pieces going on that, for me, while I would agree that all of these are perhaps a bit too expensive when you add a tie scale, I see the extra for this over a full tie XM18. Let's put it that way. And that's where I'm at with a knife like this. If you're still with me, thank you. You're lovely. Okay, so this one I've added black to the back of it because I like the fact that it mirrors the piece of carbon fibre on the front. What's negative about this knife? It's in S35VN. I'm personally absolutely fine with that on a Hinderer. I actually think it's quite an appropriate steel. They've started using S45 as well on some of them, and that's really nice as well. The only actual genuine negative point I have with this knife in front of me here, obviously there might be some of these with detents that aren't as good as this, although the ones I've had, like I said, I've handled 3 and they're all fantastic, is that piece of the edge is definitely too close to the back of the knife. Is it something that puts me off the knife? No, this is one of my favourite knives in my collection, and I include that against high-end customs and all the rest of it. I love the MP1, which is why I'm making this largely pointless video. That is too close though. When it's in your pocket, you're going to have a hard time hitting it because of the flipper tab. I mean, you're really going to have to make quite a big effort to get in there and cut yourself. You're not going to fall off the flipper tab and hit it. I don't actually think it's a practical problem, but it is something within the design, because of this area here, that provides fantastic ergonomics. Incidentally, if this was a full review, I would have talked about that earlier, but the ergonomics on this knife are fantastic. In just about every grip, it's great. Even if you want to do a reverse grip or whatever else, it's lovely in hand. Hammer, saber, you can put your thumb up on the back of the blade for more support. It's a fantastic ergonomic piece of work, and it's brilliant. But as I say, that one little issue there, because of how slim it is in this dimension, which gives such a nice feeling in hand, because by and large your forefinger or your first finger and your thumb quite like to be close together. That's why choils often feel really good, I think. It's just fantastic in hand. It isn't enough to bother me, I've got to be honest. I mean, I'm pressing quite hard there, and I have quite small fingers, and I'm not cutting myself, so it's okay. And this is sharp, by the way. But yeah, I'm going to stop waffling now. That's the MP1. It's a great knife. It's a knife that, if you're into Hinderers, it's well worth trying to track down. It's beautifully made. It's got more detail than people give it credit for. And if you get one, and certainly if it has a detent as good as this one, I mean, this is, with the exception of Jason Guthrie Scout, this is kind of the benchmark of Teflon action for me. It's just beautiful. All right, guys, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed.